We did a poll when you all signed up for this session to ask which the following topics are most relevant for your company. And so we just wanted to let you know that we heard what you had to say, and we've designed this session around the priorities that you highlighted. So many folks mentioned practical applications of blockchain technology as being a high priority, seconded to digital transformation. So you'll hear a lot of those themes throughout our conversation today. And thank you again for providing that input. And I'll also note that a couple other folks typed ahead and added in blockchain for government use as being an area of interest. And we have a couple of our incredible government partners here with us today who will certainly be speaking to that in spades. So welcome. All right. Seeing that there's no one else left pending in the waiting room, we'll continue to have some folks trickling in. But I just wanted to give you a high level of what we're going to be talking about today, and then I'll pass the ball over to Mitch from Conexus to provide some context as well. So my name is Margot Johnson, and I'm the head of product at Transmute. Thank you all for joining this webinar today, talking about blockchain secured documents for global trade. Just a few housekeeping points as we get ready to get started. Please have your microphone muted, or we'll mute you if you happen to come off mute, so that our presenters' voices can come through loud and clear. We did take a more interactive style where you can see other folks on the call, because we do hope to have more of a discussion towards the end of this session and actually talk about some of these implications for your different use cases, ranging from industry applications to, I know some folks on the call are also from government and from education institutions. So we expect a variety of different questions and conversations. We are recording this session, as I mentioned, so if one of your teammates misses it, we'll come out with details later about how they can watch this recording. And then finally, continue to write down any questions or ideas you have as you listen through the session. We will have an opportunity for questions at the very end of the session. And also, Transmute is going to be sharing a link so you can schedule a 30-minute conversation with our team to talk specifically about questions for your company or your application. So know that you'll be able to share those both at the end of this session as well as in a follow-up conversation with our team, which will make very easy for you to schedule. And with that, I'd like to throw the ball over to Mitch Landis from Conexus, who's going to provide us with an overview of why we're here, and then we'll have some other folks jump in after that point. So Mitch, please take it away.
Sure. Thanks, Margot. First, I just want to echo the welcome and thank you for joining us this afternoon. And thank you to the Transmute Industries team for hosting and sharing their technology, and thanks to their partners at Department of Homeland Security and U.S. Customs and Border Protection Office of Trade. Most of you are familiar with Conexus Indiana, and you know that we're focused on accelerating, promoting, growing Indiana's advanced manufacturing logistics sectors. We do that in a variety of ways. Connect businesses, educators, government leaders through councils and working groups. We motivate, prepare talent pipeline for advanced manufacturing and logistics jobs. We share compelling stories about those who make things, move things in Indiana. And the part that I'm fortunate enough to lead really anticipates the impact of technology. And so, you know, whether you want to call it Industry 4.0, Factory of the Future, Smart Manufacturing, or something else, it's clear that wide-scale digital transformation is underway, and Conexus wants to make sure that to the fullest extent possible, the people, the plants, the operations that are so critical to our state's economy are keeping an eye on the landscape of evolving technology to make measured and smart decisions about what, when, and how to implement technology, and to make you know, just good decisions about that. So we do that in a couple ways. One of which is facilitating emerging technology showcases like this, where we highlight specifically tech solutions, something that's early stage, but yet is commercially launched and ready to adopt. Something we think has potential and value proposition for AMLs in Indiana, and something that fits within broad suite of technologies that we're focused on. So one of the most interesting technologies that we're looking at is distributed ledger or blockchain. The landscape for that is changing rapidly. I think the landscape of opinion is moving rapidly on it, especially for supply chain and logistics folks. I can tell you in the last 6 to 9 months, personally, I've heard sentiment within the Conexus network go from I'm not really sure it applies to me to don't mention the B word because I'm not interested to maybe it's real, but I don't know much about it to I've got to figure out how it works and what it means. So here we are with a diverse group of participants on this call. We've got manufacturers, logistics operations, supply chain professionals, universities, and a number of professionals who work in foreign trade represented on this call. I'll tell you, we picked Transmute to highlight here today for a couple reasons. They're very active in developing some of the standards coming out of working groups like the World Wide Web Consortia's group on decentralized identifiers, and they're one of the technologies that was selected to participate in the Silicon Valley Innovation Program. And as part of that program, they've adapted their core technology to secure identities and verify credentials to ensure that Customs and Border Protection has visibility into provenance, traceability, regulatory compliance of raw material imports. And so they're here with their partners at Department of Homeland Security and Customs Border Protection to share with us what they're doing and how the U.S. government is engaging with blockchain in the area of foreign trade. And they're collecting feedback and insights from industry. So I can't stress that last part enough. There's going to be plenty of time for Q&A and dialogue at the tail end of this. So please take advantage of that to not only get answers to your questions, but also offer the kinds of insights and perspective that Transmute can use to strengthen and evolve their product to better fit the needs of that you see in the field in commercial applications. So with that said, I'm going to get out of the way and turn things over to Transmute by introducing Carol Fowler, CEO and co-founder of Transmute.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mitch, and thanks to you and your team for having us here today. We're absolutely thrilled and honored to have you guys, as well as our partners at DHS, SVIP, and Customs Border Protection, join us, so that you guys can hear the variety of voices that are part of actualizing the technologies that we're working on today. So before we dive in, I wanted to provide a little bit more context on who we are and what we do. As Mitch said, I'm Carol Fowler, the CEO and co-founder at Transmute. We're based in Austin, Texas, and this is where we focus on securing critical trade data in global supply chains. So some examples of the challenges we address across different supply chains include proving the provenance of goods, proving sustainable sourcing, and proving ethical labor practices for commercial vendors. Although today we'll spend most of our time focusing on the use case that we work on with our partners at Customs Border Protection. And we accomplish this by, Margot, could you go to the next slide? And actually a couple slides. Yeah, so here's some of the use cases that we work on. But across the board, in our product, we accomplish this by leveraging some emerging technologies that you'll hear a lot more about shortly, including blockchain, decentralized identifiers, and verifiable credentials. Using these technologies, we're able to provide our customers with cryptographic proof about where their products came from and who all was involved in the entire supply chain, from manufacturing to shipment to the end customer. And the result in terms of the business value and the business impact we're able to make with our customers are listed here. And most notably, data integrity. What we mean by that is the quality of the data and confidence about when specific parts of that data were created. So you'll hear a lot about that with regards to a digital certified mill test report in the steel space, but this can be applied to other things like bills of lading or purchase orders or proof of sustainable business practices. Another business value that we emphasize a lot is data access confidence. So who actually generated this particular piece of data, who still has access to it, who should continue to have access to this piece of data in the future, and most importantly often is who does not and should not have access to these particular credentials or data. And finally, when you use a product like Transmutes over time, you're able to amass data that is reliable enough to glean insights and analyze the health of your supply chain in a way that hasn't been able to be accomplished to date with so many manual and digital processes piecemealed together to support the full chain of custody. And finally, before I hand the ball to our partners at Customs Border Protection, I wanted to highlight a little bit about what we're working on with them, which you'll hear the use case more in a bit. In this particular use case, we've partnered with DHS, SBIP, and Customs Border Protection to power a verifiable trade report, or a digital version of a certified mill test report. And using Transmute, we're able to give the commercial manufacturers and regulatory authorities instantaneous access to the data that they need to process the imported goods much more rapidly, including achieve certainty about key points about that particular steel product's chain of custody, like the precise point of origin, the precise point of time when the mill test report was created, who created it, and how they were verified. And with that, I'm thrilled and honored to have our partner, Vinny, who's serves in a director capacity at several different offices within Customs Border Protection, to review some of the technology. Vinny?
Thank you, Carol. And I'm most appreciative that you didn't say Customs and Border Patrol, which is not unusual for me to be introduced with. It's Customs and Border Protection. Margot, if you could get right into the first slide. So I want to give you a little bit of background. I have a little bit of magic I have to work for. I usually do this presentation in about 45 minutes, and I have 15. So I'm hoping that Margot and Carol will keep me on time. But something that Mitch said earlier that really struck a chord with me is skepticism. You know, when blockchain first came out, you would have thought it was going to solve world hunger, world peace, and that was all there was to it. And I got brought into this, and I'm an IT professional now going on 15, 16 years. And, you know, I'm a very skeptical person. And when I was brought into blockchain, I didn't trust any of the hype that was out there. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. But ultimately, what happened was I went out on the road and I started talking about what we were doing. And I started to realize that the reason people weren't understanding blockchain is because the sales terms were coming out and people were getting caught up on the sales terms. And then as soon as the technical person would go from those sales terms into what it actually did, they would start to gloss over the people in the audience. I had this happen, watched this happen a number of times. So I'm down in Houston just about 2 years ago, and I'm making a presentation, and it was the first time I think people had heard a business view. And I actually got swarmed when I came off the stage. I felt like a rock star and everything, although you can certainly tell that I'm not. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a 101 really quick on what blockchain is to make sure that you understand it so that you're comfortable. And then after that, I'll talk to you a little bit about what the government's doing and why we're so excited about it. So in order to understand blockchain, forgetting all the things that you hear on the outside and how it's going to change the world, there is a niche aspect to this program that's very important. But ultimately, if you are dealing with OneDrive or you are dealing with Dropbox, you probably already understand the tenets of blockchain. Because when you put a document down on one of the group file folders in either one of those programs that I just mentioned, it makes it available to everybody all at the same time. So we kind of coined the term the team sport of data. In fact, FedEx has told me that I stole it from them, although I don't really believe that. But the team sport of data, meaning that everybody is seeing those transactions, okay? So in blockchain, one of the reasons that it has become so important is because you can reach out to entities that you don't normally get to. So it has a security aspect of it. So if you picture in your mind a block, and let's say there's 10 of them, and you look at each one of them, they'll have a unique ID number. But behind that, there's also a unique ID number of the block before it. So if somebody hacks into it, systems talking to each other can actually now compare data and say, hey, there's an issue. And you can design your system to actually figure out, to actually warn you that there's something nefarious going on. The whole aspect of what we're looking into the future of this is that, as you see when we get into the next couple of slides, you'll see that we're starting to look at how do we actually know origin, how do we actually know who the players are, so that we can get into a digitized experience and get out of the paper processes. So I'm going to move to the next slide, please. So what is the role in blockchain? Well, you've already heard some of it, the concept of weeding through the hype. And that's something that I kind of pride myself on, because I don't get caught up in the emotion of it. I'm looking at the practicality of it. That's what all the IT experience does. You have to look at what the technology actually does in order to make an investment. And you have to start taking a holistic view. One of the things that was happening, and I almost fell off my chair when I was in New York at one of these blockchain conferences, is that everybody's talking about shipping, but they weren't talking about the requirements to make entry into the US. So because of this, because we started studying this, we started looking at things that were very important and needed to be more defined. We're kind of at the beginning stages, like when the internet was first being developed, right? We're doing the same thing with blockchain. So interoperability, not open source, but interoperability, meaning software to software, can you talk to each other? Data correlation, what can you put on a chain versus what you can't? Obviously, the government can't put personally identifiable information, your social security numbers, driver's license numbers. We can't give away trade secrets either, because we don't want to take away the jobs of the people who are trying to steal that out of the garbage cans now, right? We want to make sure that we're keeping that data safe. Obviously, we want to look for good, solid use cases that actually need blockchain. Unfortunately, a lot of government agencies just pointed at blockchain and said, go. And so they spent money needlessly. It can be very expensive up front if you're spending money for something that you don't need, and we don't want to do that. And the last thing we're trying to do is really take that long pole view, which is my job as an innovation professional. Next slide, please. There's a couple of things. I mean, there is some real business value in blockchain, but I want to explain the word trust. Trust is not like I trust Carol and Margot are working for Transmute, or I trust my wife, or I trust my kids to do the right things sometimes. Trust in the computer world is the comparison of data. Is the original data that I got in the same thing that every node is receiving, and do they agree? And because of that word, the misunderstanding of that, people have naturally thought that if I put any data onto a blockchain, it's naturally fixed, and that's not true. I could tell you that if you put really bad data or garbage data in it, what you have is very secure garbage data, and that's not what we want. It also, as we start to go and look at the standards really quick, the government is looking at starting to understand entity identification in a way that it hasn't done before in an electronic fashion. I don't want to spend too much time here because I want to get into that in the next slide. Immutability is that once that data is on the blockchain, it's not going to be changed. That's very important, but that doesn't mean that you can't update data. All right, it simply means that the transaction is there and it's always going to be there, but you can certainly add another transaction so that you can do updates. The obvious outcomes of this is that we're looking at tracking at a whole new level. Can we get back to origin, not just of the manufacturer, but where the product is physically getting their sources from? Can we track it all the way through till it gets to the carrier and then into the borders of the US? This is important not only for the government, but for private industry as well. Can't you imagine at this point in time being able to see as a consumer a product coming off the manufacturing line and winding up in a retail store, and you knowing genuinely that you got what you purchased? On top of that, think about when you start to think about pharmaceuticals, when you start to think about lead in toys, this becomes very important. One of the biggest things that blockchain is bringing, at least in my area or my sector, is the concept of team effort or group input. For the first time, we're looking at re-engineering processes in a way that we would consider it to be 21st century, meaning everybody now is inputting data. Because what's the easiest thing to fraudulently submit to somebody? A piece of paper that somebody's put some bad information on, right? Or doctored. On top of that, the whole concept of having to manage a document that's been sent through the system to you and then has to be looked at, or maybe just counted. But now, now that we're getting input from the actual people who are putting the data in, instead of writing it on a piece of paper, they're inputting it into a system. You now have data that becomes information. When you look at the success of Walmart and what they did with the food safety program, they were able to get farmers to actually put in data and track it all the way through to their retail stores. So the salmonella poisonings that you've heard about in the news, where it used to take days and weeks to locate the product and pull it back, it now is down to minutes and hours. And that's really amazing. Blockchain in and of itself, the bottom line here, I want you to pay particular attention to. I don't think it's going to change what we collect, but how we collect it. And that's what's really important. Next slide, please. So these I'm going to go through very rapidly, keep it at a business level. Decentralized identifiers, they're like your driver's license number. It's a unique ID. It's got a public-private pairing. So if I show up on the network and Margot and I are on the network together, Margot will always be able to recognize whatever network I go on because I have that public showing. But I have a private part of me too, so she can't steal my identity. Now, if you think about this from a driver's license perspective and you add, you were just to give that to an officer. So Margot, forgive me for picking on you, but if Margot is a police officer and she pulled me over because I was speeding, if I just gave her an ID, it wouldn't tell her very much. So the next step is to give the biographical data or the license that describes who I am. And as you can tell, I'm 6 foot tall, blue-eyed, and often confused for Superman, right? So the concept is that, okay, now I've got the the data so I can tell who this person is, but verifiable claims takes it one step further. For Margot to know that I have a legitimate license and that's been issued to me, she can now get back to the DMV. This is what's really starting to take shape in the world today. And if you think about that, if you can get that down to a 95% automation level, and you now know that who you're trading with is legitimate, this really advances the system. The decentralized key management system is really, it's been updated to be called encrypted vaults. And I know Anil John's on later, he'll be talking about that. But what this does is, if I need to trade data, and I'm going to keep picking on Margot, since she is the one that first saw me when I came in. If I just want to have information shared with Margot, and I don't want any of you to know about it, what I can do is have Margot, she has like a post office box, she can give me the key to the post office box. So I go in, I take the data out when I need it, when I'm done, I put it back in and I lock it. Think about that in terms of computers, you now have a firewall. So the trade is able to keep their data safe behind their firewall and keep it available to us 24/7 because we have a key to get it. It also gives them control, so they can have a security control that would allow people that are also affiliated, or entities that are affiliated with them, make it so that they can get the data as well. So this becomes a very, very unique way of trading data, identifying who's legitimate, and being able to keep everything safe. Next slide, please. So right now, we've been working with the Silicon Valley Initiative Program with DHS Science and Technology Directorate, and I got to tell you, they've been outstanding partners for us. We have a number of pieces going forward. Pipeline is one of ours, and steel, obviously. Timber, by the way, we had been going forward with it, but we're re-looking at that again. Food safety is the Walmart piece. We're starting to talk to Walmart about how we could get on board with that. And we're even looking at e-commerce, as well as natural gas and several other pieces that are starting to really look interesting. I don't remember if we have another slide on this, Margot. Oh, okay, of course, how could I forget? We're talking about steel. Okay, so the amazing thing that's happening, especially with steel, and I got to tell you, Transmute has been doing an A+ job. They're a phenomenal organization. What we're looking at is getting data, what we're calling pre-arrival or pre-release. So when goods come into the US, in order to get past customs, we have to actually release those goods. So in the steel environment, what we're doing is we're looking at being able to get the mill test very early in when it's actually reported, and then tying that into the data. So we're able to see who's the legitimate manufacturer. We're able to ensure the classifications against the product that's been identified. And then, of course, the fact that the report can't be altered. These are all very important things to us. And when you look at it, we're now getting that data in real time, whereas now we have to ask for something, it has to be sent, and there's delays, there can be issues, there's documents, but this is all in automation. Next slide. So obviously, where we're starting to get excited, if you're starting to follow the stream of thought, and this is something that I'm just seeing at a point in my career that I never expected, but it's usually there's a balance between facilitation and enforcement. You're giving one up for the other. With this blockchain stuff that we're doing, it's the first time that I'm seeing facilitation increase and enforcement increase at the same time. So that means we're able to concentrate on the goods that we're not getting the information on, and allow the goods that we are getting the information to move more quickly into our system. That saves time and money ultimately for the industry. So if you think of 180 degrees, and we now have 60, 70, 80% of the goods covered, because we know legitimately what it's made of, where it's coming from, how it's been transported. It allows us to focus on that needle in the haystack. So we go from 180 degrees maybe to 30 degrees, making our job easier and better. And this is what we're looking to do across all of these projects. HCS classification is huge for us, because knowing the country of origin is going to affect the duty rate and all of that. So very important stuff. Margot. Anyway, that's what I have for you today. I hope I was able to encapsulate it in enough time. Margot, I hope I hit Carol, I hope I hit my timing functions correctly, but I'll stick around if there's any questions after this.
Awesome. Thank you, Vinny. That was exactly 15 minutes. I don't know how you did it. Very impressed. All right. Well, we're going to dive in now and make this even more tangible. And thank you again, Vinny, for sharing all of your perspectives, and based on your experience working across many different kinds of projects, your voice is very welcome here. So we're going to talk a little bit more specifically about the work that Transmute has been doing with Customs and Border Protection, and we're just going to take you to the wall of where the thoughts are and where the products are. And then we open this up to have a conversation together, both at the end of this call and into subsequent calls with our company, to understand what we're missing or how we can improve these processes. So if we look at that steel import track and trace example that Vinny laid out, we're looking at those value propositions not only for government parties who care about those facilitation and enforcement benefits, but also for global businesses who care about meeting the needs of their customers in the best way possible, timely delivery of steel that is trusted and safe, where there's not going to be any issue going back and finding out that it was transshipped or part of an anti-dumping case or something like that. People want the right products at the right times, and they want to trust the parties that they came from. So some of the key questions that we've been exploring together with Customs and Border Protection, as well as other industry partners working in steel, are: where do these materials originate? What company manufactured them, or in some cases multiple companies transforming steel over time into different states? Who else was involved in the shipment process? Have all parties presented required documentation? And one example of a trade document is a certified mill test report. There are many other trade documents that are also important. For the sake of this proof of concept, we've focused in on this one. And then finally, are the arriving materials consistent with the original shipment description? So making sure you actually got what you paid for, and that CBP is actually reviewing materials that they expect to be reviewing, and not something hidden or being used actually for a different purpose. This is just a note on the way that Transmute works with our customers, including DHS SBIP and Customs Border Protection. Especially with emergent technology, you have to work together to co-design solutions. So we're actually working together in this third phase of pilot or proof of concept application development, where we're bringing and showing application proof of concepts to industry experts and refining and improving that over time so that it actually meets business needs and isn't just developed off in a technical innovation lab silo where it doesn't actually connect to reality. And you can feel free to talk more with our team about these different services in a follow-up conversation. So looking at specifically that certified mill test report or mill report, mill certificate, goes by a couple different names. Traditionally, what we found is that there's just about as many mill certs as there are companies out there in terms of the diversity of the physical documents, the data models behind them. There are some standard fields around chemicals, grades, specifications, heat numbers, but these tend to vary greatly by company. And it makes it challenging for a machine or even an individual to analyze across a wide number of these documents. So part of what we've been doing is digitizing or mapping into existing digitized processes, depending where a customer is, in order to generate a digitally verifiable version of that certified mill test report. And we'll start to talk more about what that means and how that connects to some of the technology that Vinny mentioned. But first, let's zoom out a little bit and take what, if you are a steel expert on this call, you'll probably think this is relatively simplistic, and it is, but let's just, for the sake of the time being, let's zoom out a little bit and imagine that we're importing steel to the United States from China. There are a lot of reasons that that can be contentious. We're trying to protect US markets from a flood of foreign steel and ensure that US companies are able to successfully sell their steel. So this is a particularly important case for ensuring that we understand the point of origin and associated duties or tariffs. In this case, a manufacturer is initiating the process of exporting steel to the United States. And they're going to be using the Transmute application to create and sign a digital certified mill test report. When they do that, and we'll show you what that looks like in just a second, they'll anchor that information behind the scenes will be automatically anchored to a blockchain. And the thing that we're anchoring is a pointer to that information. So kind of like a table of contents or a glossary, we're saying you can find this information here. The information itself isn't here. Some of that's probably private and protected. You have to be authenticated to see it, but we have reference to that information and we know who created it and in exactly what time they created it in a tamper evident way. And then when that mill cert is created, it can be instantly shared with different parties who might include further parties down the supply chain, the end customer or importer, as well as Customs and Border Protection, who, to the point Vinny made, might be interested in preemptively looking at this information as they're determining if pre-arrival criteria have been met or other pre-release needs. So we're moving from that manufacturer's experience of creating a mill cert through subsequent either transformations or progressive custody in that chain of custody as that steel is exported and moved across different parties. We'll focus less on that for this presentation today, but it's something we're exploring as we look at other trade documents like bills of lading that can go through the same digitization and verification process. When things arrive to the United States and Customs Border Protection is reviewing the steel shipment, they're able to look at the details of that certified mill test report in association with that shipment. And based on the reputation, the existing shipments from that importer, as well as other information contained in that mill cert, they can escalate any discrepancies or questions around point of origin. Maybe they suspect that something is actually from China, even though it's been shipped through Malaysia, et cetera. And then they can also issue appropriate tariffs or duties. Finally, the end advanced manufacturer, customer, distributor is going to come out with a verifiable receipt that includes that digital mill cert information, which they can continue to access, along with, in the future, other trade information that's captured along this chain as that steel is moving from its start location all the way through its end destination. And again, only authorized parties can see private trade information, which is a really important distinction. All of your proprietary data does not become public just because you're using a blockchain. So I've kind of mentioned this, we're linking these things together in a digital form that's easy to share and reference, and these systems can now start to talk to each other without having to have custom individual integrations across all those different partners. So I'm going to show you a demonstration of what this can look like in an application form, and knowing that that's also powered by APIs that could be used to connect into different systems. we'll focus on the production and inspection portions. I'm going to play a video here, and I'll speak over what you're seeing here in the application. So here we're signing into the Transmute for Trade application, where using a traditional username and password, a manufacturer would be able to sign in and create a mill certificate. So if this is their first time, we're going to capture some organization information and branding so we can associate that with their mill certificate and any subsequent certificates that they create using this account. They're then able to create a certified mill test report using this application. Again, this could also all be happening via API with an integration between different systems, but that's not very pretty to show, so we're showing this user interface. We include some of that manufacturer branding here so you know who exactly is creating this mill report. And here I've kind of auto-magically added the data in so you can see what this looks like when it's filled out. Again, this could have happened via a CSV upload or API integration, but we're including those common fields for the mill report here. Chemical and mechanical properties, heat numbers, weight, yield to tensile ratio, all the good things that come in this relatively complex trade document. And we do want to acknowledge that this is not yet a standardized document, or rather we're working towards understanding how this can become even more standardized for the different parties who are creating it. Here I'm allowing digital signing, and my signature is being associated with this mill certificate. So if I'm a quality manager or quality assurance specialist as a manufacturer, this information can now be tracked back to me as the person who certified its authenticity. Here we're looking at that completed mill certificate, and we can see a pretty easy to consume summary. This is what Customs Border Protection or an end customer could look at if they needed to see the details of that mill report in a standardized way. And just a few other details here. Based on the needs of import specialists, we've looked at including things like origin maps for the site of that manufacturer's location, making sure it looks like a place that actually is somewhere you would manufacture steel. And then we're also working on, with open standards, around ways to digitally share this document as a PDF or in other forms, but still always linking back to its digital form so that you can come in and verify that information and the identities behind it. And I'll come down to the bottom here, and you can see that the organization information is also included. So in addition to the branding, there's information about that manufacturer's account. And this can help us understand the reputation of this manufacturer over time. And we can even start to associate other trade documents like a legal entity identifier or business registration with that manufacturer. So that was a walkthrough of the proof of concept mill certificate application. You'll notice none of that looked particularly blockchainy, and that's on purpose. We're not trying to make a manufacturer have to understand how to use a blockchain in order to conduct a simple process like this, creating a certificate and then signing it and then being able to share it with other parties. However, for the sake of this webinar, we want to take you behind the scenes and show you what's actually happening behind the application that is the blockchain and other emergent standards piece. There we go. All right, so Vinny already mentioned a couple of these things. I'm just going to reiterate them. Some are probably old terms that you've heard before, some are new. So some of the emergent technology building blocks that Transmute leverages in our application, one of them optionally is blockchain, or you've maybe heard the term a distributed ledger. And you can think of this as basically a permanent shared database. I like the way Vinny said it's the system to system agreement that can be useful in very specific use cases where you have a large number of parties who need to share information safely but don't have shared systems to do so. Another key term is decentralized identifier. If you're pretty technical and you want to dig into these things more deeply, you can also go to the World Wide Web Consortium's website and look at the open standards for these emergent technologies. Again, that tends to get pretty technically heavy very fast. So for those who are on more the business side, you can think of this as a digital unique fingerprint that can be used to identify people, organizations, devices, and even processes in such a way that it can be proved back to that entity. So that's those key pairs that Vinny spoke of and the ability to be identified using those keys continuously over time. And then finally, verifiable credential. This is probably our favorite term. It's the emergent standard that we think is the most exciting because it builds on top of and brings together the benefits of distributed ledgers and decentralized identifiers. And in its simplest form, you can think of this as a certified document, but it's a certified document that has really special properties where you can actually ensure the authenticity of, you know, that was the data that was input at that moment in time. It is signed by specific parties who are involved in that workflow using actually their decentralized identifier key pairs. And then that information can be shared across different parties in a network and presented to different parties in network, either in its full form or selectively presented just certain data attributes depending on what your role is in a network at that given moment in time. So you may not need to know everything, you can just know some information about that verifiable credential. And this is the technology that we're using to build those mill reports that you just saw. So if we were all in a room together on a whiteboard, I would draw out these blocks on the whiteboard and we'd talk through it. Given that we're all here digitally, I'm going to draw them out on the screen and help you see how these things all fit together. So blockchain anchoring is just the beginning, and that's a starting point when that need for system-to-system agreement is true. On top of the blockchain anchoring, we add in these decentralized identifiers. As I mentioned, they can be associated with people, organizations, assets, IoT devices, and even processes. So in the case of the mill report that we just looked at, we had unique decentralized identifiers of unique fingerprints for the people, for the organizations or the manufacturers, as well as for the verifiable credentials or the mill certificates. So those mill certificates, structured as verifiable credentials, also have unique decentralized identifiers in the transmute system. And we've done that in a specific way that's very scalable when using it with a blockchain, which we're happy to answer more questions about down the line. Those verifiable credentials can actually be, well, one thing here, actually this encrypted data vault piece or encrypted data storage, as Vinny mentioned, is also a really important part. So the information in these verifiable credentials, you know, those chemical percentages, the personal identifying information of the individual, the organization contact details, all of that sensitive information is stored in an encrypted data vault, and only authorized parties can access that information. And we have some great blog posts and things that share more about what encrypted data vaults are and how they work with existing cloud storage solutions. And they ensure that only people with those right decentralized identifiers can access that information at a given point in time. I recognize this is a lot. I'm going to keep piling through some of these other technical details, and we're going to bring it back up to the business level now. This is the just the blockchain 101 and how it connects into the trade application. So from here, those verifiable credentials, so mill certificates, other key trade documents can actually be linked together to tell a story about an asset over time. And this can be done in some really interesting ways that cross the way we think about systems today. So a couple examples are using verifiable credentials or these trusted documents for vendor onboarding, product attributes, and understanding a chain of custody. So for vendor supplier onboarding, basically, who is this organization and why should I trust them? We can use the same verifiable credential structures to create documents such as evidence of legal entity identifiers, business registration, or the fact that a business is a diverse business. And those might be generated by the business itself, or, and sometimes this is possible and it's a much stronger case, that legal entity identifier or that business registration can be provided by the government or can be provided by another valid issuer of that piece of information, and then provided to that supplier or that vendor. And that's going to be a much stronger ID proof or much stronger evidence that that business is in fact who they say they are. On the product attribute side, we might see things like the certified mill test report, but for other products, we might see, for example, avocados or other produce, a phytosanitary certificate indicating details about that perishable good. Or for your olive oil or your baby formula, you would want to know that it was certified organic by a trusted third party, and then have that pass through the actual brand itself. So those are examples of product attribute verifiable credentials. On the chain of custody side, there's some of these trade documents, not just the mill report, there's also commercial invoices, e-bills of lading, entry summaries, and other documentation that is critical for global trade and can be linked together to tell the story and provide a transparent overview of what's happening with goods as they move around the globe. So what we're doing here is we're layering up identifiers and credentials to build security, and then we're enabling that data to be verified by drilling back down through each of these different layers. And our software makes this easy and kind of surfaces those things in a business forward way to our customers. But this is what's happening behind the scenes that is the true innovation in terms of mixing these emergent technologies together. And just one more point here, let's just look at that chain of custody use case for steel. And we can imagine some of the different actors might include manufacturers, importers, carriers, customs brokers. We can think about the steel shipment itself as a type of identity, the actual steel. There might be monitoring devices, maybe or maybe not, depending on the type of steel. And then finally, there's the actual CBP import process itself, which can also be identified uniquely with a decentralized identifier. And what we're doing here is then taking those credentials that related to building the authenticity of that vendor, and we can use those to better understand and trust that manufacturer, that importer, or that carrier. On the product attribute side, we can have something like that certified mill test report to understand that we're seeing steel that is the appropriate grade and specification and that it's safe for use. And all of this information, the reference points to this information are anchored to a blockchain to make it possible for different systems to discover that information, and should that party be authenticated, to view private details when needed for that business use case. And as mentioned, they would need to be authenticated because that private information is only going to be accessible by authorized parties. So that's a high-level overview of what's happening behind the scenes and how we're specifically using blockchain technology in combination with these other emergent technologies to power trade solutions. And last but not least here, before I throw the ball over to Anil John, who's going to pull us up a level and speak more broadly than Transmute about what's going on here, I just want to give you the moment of what does a blockchain actually look like, because it can feel very mysterious when you've never actually seen one, and they're probably less exciting than you imagine. But we can actually go from the trade application here. Here's that unique decentralized identifier for a mill certificate. And I can actually take this over into a website that Transmute's created called element-did.com. This is a decentralized identity method that Transmute helped to develop. And here I can actually resolve that DID, and I can see information in that what's called DID document that it's related to an encrypted credential, and this endpoint is telling me that it's stored in an encrypted data vault. But beyond that, I can't see any business information about this credential or anything that could jeopardize my trade secrets. And the last piece here, this Explorer, we're looking at different blocks in a blockchain, just like Vinny mentioned earlier, and we can actually go in and look at these individual transactions. Again, it makes your eyes hurt a little bit if you're not a developer, but you can actually go in and see the associated signature and the fact that that also points back to an encrypted data vault. So you've officially now seen the connection from an application all the way through into a blockchain, and you get to know that that's running in the background and creating those transparency and security properties, but your customers and your business team do not have to actually see this interface when you work with companies that build the layers on top of it. And with that, let me go one more slide here. All right, and with that, I'm actually going to stop sharing and pass the ball over to Anil John. All right, he's made it on the call, had an important meeting right before this, but thank you, Anil, for joining us. And we would love to have you tell us more about the Silicon Valley Innovation Program and all of your work in this area. And I'll open it up for you to share your screen and present your slides.
Thank you, Margot. Good afternoon, everyone. Let me just make sure that at least I get the mechanics out of the way. Hopefully, are you by any chance seeing my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect. And is it in full screen mode by any chance?
Seems to be.
It looks
All
like
right,
it's
perfect. All right, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. First of all, good afternoon, and my apologies for being late. Usually, when my friend Vinny and I do this tag team, I tend to do this before him so that he can go dive deep into the U.S. customs implications. So, our apologies for the switch. As you can see, when the people who give you money on the appropriation staff at the U.S. Senate and House basically call you, you show up, and you show up looking, like this, right? So, on that note, let me see. Just want to give you a little bit of background. Oh, okay. The host has asked you to start the video. Okay, perfect. I am starting my video. All right, thank you. All right, so I wanted to set the broader stage of how we ended up in the space, and forgive me if I am actually repeating stuff that Vinny already told you. I will try to zoom past that because I know that knowing him, he was excited, very enthusiastic, and he's been an awesome partner to work with in this, right? So I am not in the same organization as Vinny. We are both working for DHS. DHS, as you well know, is a organization that came together after 9/11 as part of a shotgun wedding. So they have a multitude of functions, including U.S. Customs that Vinny's part of. I'm with our Science and Technology Directorate, which is the R&D arm and the science advisor to the department. So think of us as the entity that actually provides the technology, the due diligence, and the R&D for operational components like customs and border protection that is focused on international trade. We sort of got into the blockchain piece because there was about 4.5-5 years ago, there was a whole bunch of, bright and shiny, everything was, breathless, exciting about blockchain. And we were very concerned that it was a globally visible, bright and shiny object. And we sort of wanted to understand the applicability of the technology to a lot of the business use cases. And I think in general, this is relevant to everybody, right? What are the security and privacy implications of it? What is the gain to pain ratio of using this technology? Is the gain of adapting and integrating with this technology worth the pain that you as an organization might encounter in doing so? DHS happens to be a law enforcement organization, so we had a lot of interest in the digital currency side of the blockchain technologies, such as the Bitcoins and a lot of the anonymous currencies. I'm not going to talk about that because that is not relevant to what we are talking about. So I will keep it on the blockchain IT focused side of the house, right? So I will make this particular statement, right? 90 to 95% of the use cases that I've heard about using blockchain by any company is complete and total BS. You don't need a blockchain to do that, right? So we actually spent a lot of time and energy and effort trying to make sure that we actually had a pretty clear heuristic on how to decide whether we wanted, whether a particular approach, a use case was actually relevant to a blockchain. I am told that Gartner has appropriated this, put a little bit of changes, so you will see a variation of this if you ever read any of the Gartner reports as well. The long and the short of it is, I will tee up the major points here, right? If your use case is completely internal to one organization, you don't need a blockchain. You know what? There are better technologies, much mature technologies, shared databases, a Amazon or Microsoft Azure or a Google Cloud hosted infrastructure that is resilient is perfectly fine. Where blockchain and distributed ledger technologies actually is relevant is if you are in a position where there are multiple independent parties, none of them want to own the infrastructure or want others to own the infrastructure, but you all need to somehow share information. That is precisely why the partnership with the Office of Trade in Customs and Border Protection came into play. Trade actually has that use case. They have, partner government agencies, the broader ecosystem outside of, DHS and the U.S. government that, like you all, that you need to interoperate with. Every single piece of, goods that are coming into the U.S. obviously needs to provide information to, Customs and Border Protection before they make the yes, no, we want to talk to you decision on what to do with that good, right? So. This is why blockchain looked to be appropriate for trade. But at the same time, again, 4.5, 5 years ago, we found a lot of people simply, hand waving the architecture and design that sort of goes into how you clearly separate public and private data. There was no work around every single blockchain vendor that we were aware of was at that point in time using proprietary data formats in order to try and lock you into their particular platform, right? So, a distributed ledger implies data. Right? So data means, syntax and semantics on how you represent data. You're all familiar with how you represent different types of trade goods. Everybody wanted to have their special way of representing it as a way to lock you in. Anybody who tells you that, in order to basically, conduct an operation of the blockchain, it usually requires, some sort of a public-private key management. Because you have a certificate, you are allowed to conduct certain actions on the blockchain, whether it is, write, read, do something else. Anybody who tells you that the distributed key management at scale, which is what happens when that if you want to distribute that keys and those certificates to all the parties across multiple organizations, what happens if somebody loses it? How do you sort of revoke it? What happens if something is compromised? How do you reissue it after that has been revoked? Anybody who tells you that that problem is solved is lying to you, right? So distributed key management is a really hard problem. And obviously it is something that needs to be solved within the blockchain environment as well. And we can talk about smart contracts and things like that, but I just wanted to give you a sense that there were a lot of unknowns and a lot of challenges in that space when we sort of were looking at it, and we were very concerned. And we didn't want to take a bright and shiny approach. Let's just blockchain it. We want to take a pretty, sensitive way of addressing the problem holistically, right? So I will give you a classic example here and why this is relevant to trade, right? As I mentioned, Office of Trade needs to get data from anybody who is shipping goods into the US. Now, assume for a moment, and it is a reality right now, is that there's a lot of interest in the supply chain area with blockchain technologies. Now, assume also that there are multiple trading consortiums or large multinationals who have each chosen to deploy their own blockchain technology within their particular vertical or environment. Now, they're all legally required to share the data that they're moving into the US with CBP. Now, in order for CBP to actually get access to the data, they are now required to basically run the node of every itty bitty blockchain environment and trading consortium that is out there. For those of you who may be from an IT background or even from a business background, let me assure you that that is a unbounded problem, right? That is a problem without a solution for any rational entity, right? So for us, what was critically important was interoperability. We wanted to basically not do the one ring to bind them all. We didn't want to be in a position where CBP was mandating a particular blockchain platform that should be used by everybody. That was not a path to success for us, for a variety of reasons, none of them technical. The other piece of it is basically we want to actually encourage companies and organizations to bring their own platform to the table. How do you sort of meet in the middle? We need to come up with standards and specifications that ensure that these different technologies can actually interoperate at the payload level, at the pipes that connect these infrastructures, and at the policy level. And that was our first piece of it. I think Vinny probably touched on it. I know that Margot just talked about it as well. We actually invested I was the program manager that actually originally funded the work around decentralized identifiers, then pushed that into the W3C. Did the same thing for the verifiable credentials work, because we believe that it was critically important that there be global traction around it, that there be open visibility around it. So these are specifically standards and specifications that we considered important enough that we didn't want to be in control, but we wanted the community to sort of come together and define them, and we would then adopt it as things that we would want to implement so that there was a competitive ecosystem of services that were out there, right? So then it's not enough to just magically do standards development. You actually have to invest in, do the standards actually work? This is where the partnership with Vinny and the CVP Office of Trade critically came into place, right? So he may have talked about it, but we did some really critical proof of concept implementation with multiple companies, both large and small. The starting one was around a NAFTA captive free trade agreement. This was the first one where we actually had was multiple independent blockchain implementations, all using the same data model to make sure that they were able to share the data. This was sort of our first move out of the gate. It actually demonstrated two things: that a environment where you've chosen a common standard for data models, verifiable credentials and decentralized identifiers, could actually share the data with CVP. We also discovered one particular thing, that we need to come up with architectural models that clearly separated what could be shared across all of the entities. Let me assure you, UPS and FedEx are not friends, but they're on the same blockchain environment. So you want to be very, very careful to make sure that what is on the chain that is visible to all the members there is completely separated and segregated from what should be off the chain using some sort of a pointer. We actually came up with the a architectural model that we called a trusted trade server that was that each company would deploy paired with their own blockchain node. That we are happy to know that is now moving through. We then turned those lessons learned over to the W3C, which is the global standards organization that is responsible for basically the standards that underpin the internet, right? So they are actually moving that work through the W3C standards process under the moniker of encrypted data vault, which I think Margot talked about. And I think the new name is secure data stores, right? So the key here is that if you have private data that you need to share, you will deploy a secure data store in parallel with your blockchain node, and you will selectively give access to CVP trade officers to be able to real-time get access to that data. We demonstrated all of that using both that particular proof of concept and the following one with Vinny and the team around intellectual property assertions. So every lesson that we have learned, we've turned over to the open standards community, and the things that came out of it, whether it is blockchain links, how do you point from one blockchain to another, encrypted data vaults where you can segregate public and private data, common data models, verifiable credentials and decentralized identifiers. We are one voice at the table at W3C that is sharing our lessons learned and sharing our desire to basically use these technologies in the stacks that we are looking at. We're fortunate enough that, again, partnership with Office of Trade has been amazing. Vinny and the team actually went through the process so that the lessons learned that we have, we conducted through R&D as well as POCs were important enough that US Customs basically put a stake in the ground and said, hey, if you are a company and you are bringing a blockchain technology to the table and you want to interoperate with US Customs, the largest customs organization on the face of the planet, you need to use these open standards and specifications. We shall not be locked into a particular vendor or platform. We don't want you to be locked into a particular vendor or platform. Use these standards as a way to sort of interoperate across all of them, right? So, and last but not least, right? So proof of concept, showed that this could be done. Now it was time to sort of move out and operationally deploy these technologies, which is where, again, the partnership between Office of Trade and my program, which is Silicon Valley Innovation Program. Trust me, a majority of the companies from outside of the Valley, it is just a branding for us. We even have international startups in there as well. The long and the short of it is we are an organization that is set up in order to bring global talent in order to solve our local problems, right? So U.S. Customs and Border Protection came to us with a set of use cases around the movement of steel, around the movement of oil, around the movement of timber into the U.S. How do you provide attestations of the origin of goods? How do you sort of track the multiple hops in that chain? How does CBP get visibility into those hops and the confidence that there are no shenanigans going on as part of that hop, right? So that was the work that we moved out on. I won't spend any time marketing myself. Read it at your leisure. But we are set up in order to work with and bring interesting technologies and deliver it fast to DHS in a manner that mitigates the risk to our operational components, right? So our program is set up over 4 phases. Phase 1 is we've all read magical resumes, and we actually met the people. They couldn't basically, perhaps, write if their life depended on it, right? So there is an analog to startups as well. So we use phase 1 as a sort of determining, can the product team walk the talk? Can they adapt their technology from both a technology as well as a business perspective in order to solve the problems that we wanted to be solved? Phase 2 is full capability built out. Phase 3 is I throw a red team at them in order to understand the security, privacy, and interoperability aspects of their technology, and to make sure that all of the risks that we sort of consider as critical to any type of operation deployment are addressed. And finally, in partnership with our operational component, and in this particular case, Office of Trade, we make a joint decision on whether to operationally deploy these technologies. So we basically put that call out there. Margot sort of touched on the variety of pieces that sort of on the technical side. I am happy to go into any level of detail that you want, but at the end of the road, what I sort of want you to get an idea of is ultimately there are issuers of attestations. Those attestations might be issued to a person, or it might be issued to an organization which is holding those attestations. And the proof of those attestations resides in some sort of a blockchain or a DLT environment. And there is somebody on the other side that needs to verify that those attestations, first of all, are indeed right, legitimate, and coming from the organization that you think it is. And second, that the person who is actually shared that attestation with you is indeed the entity that you think it is. So this diagram sort of represents that aspect of it, right? So the issuer and a verifier. But similar to any organizations that are out there, especially large ones, we have been in the position where we've been walked into a corner by a vendor and told, hey, we have this magical API that if you tie into us, all your problems will be solved. And what you sort of discover after some time is you've now locked yourself into a proprietary API that is licensed only by that vendor. And if you decide that that vendor is no longer meeting your needs, you basically have to do an entire rip and replace in order to basically integrate the same capability again. So this was something that we explicitly put in our requirement solicitation, that APIs that are facing an issuer of these attestations, these credentials, and the APIs, application programming interfaces, that are facing the verifier of those attestations shall be publicly documented, patent-free, royalty-free, available to implement for anybody. So this was critical, and this is important to make sure that you are not beholden to a particular vendor's API in any way, shape, or form. We are happy with if they build magic sauce behind the API, but we want that API to be standardized, and we will, on a case-by-case decide whether or not the magic sauce is providing enough ROI for us in order to move this forward, right? Again, the standards that we are focused on, we wanted to make sure that these guys, any company that was implementing it, was actually doing this. implementing the standards as well. Again, putting our money where our mouth is, making sure that the technology that we are focused on was open, royalty free, because we are interested in the same thing that every company is interested in. We want a competitive ecosystem of service providers that we can draw upon in order to conduct our business, that is also interoperable and does not lock us into their particular solution. So this language and enforcement of that language is critically important to do that. This is the money shot for me, right? So I will simply move. So Transmute, obviously, here was one of the companies that responded to the solicitation. The one thing that I will, before saying anything else, is we just finished up phase 1, and one of the things that we wanted to make sure that was critically demonstrated rather than a self-attestation by a company was we wanted to make sure that the interoperability that we wanted was actually real. So we resurrected a multi-vendor interoperability plug fest where we basically wanted to make sure that the companies in our portfolio that were focused on asset tracking, independent platforms. The Transmute has a product line called Transmute for Trade. MavenNet, which is focused on the oil use case, has a platform called NeoFlow. Factum has their own blockchain for timber tracking. We wanted to make sure, concretely make sure, that we would not ever get locked into a platform and the companies themselves were actually totally interoperable. So what you see here, because Transmute is hosting this, I will use a Transmute use case. What you see here is Transmute working on behalf of a steel company, generating attestations on behalf of that steel company, sending that along to another technology provider, in this particular case, MavenNet, who's acting in the role of a customs broker that is able to validate that attestation and ensure that it is actually completely interoperable and support those interoperability specifications that we talked about, and then pass that on to another company on another completely different platform that is acting as the verifier. In this particular case, the verifier acting on behalf of CBP, which was Factum. So what you see here is 3 different companies. Again, we just showed one hop. It could be n number of hops. The key here is that every single entity in this mix could plug and play with their own technology stack, provided all of those technologies were actually using the same standards and specification. We demonstrated this as of last week, and to my knowledge, there's a lot of hand waving around interoperability. What we've seen to date, and I keep asking this, I know that Vinny keeps asking this, is that has anybody showed interoperability beyond 2 people choosing the same product and making it work across 2 different companies? And the answer that we're getting back is no. In our particular case, we had 4 other companies as well. So we showed demonstrated interoperability across 7 different independent platforms, including Hyperledger Indy, Hyperledger Fabric, Transmute for Trade, MavenNet NeoFlow, Factum, a Universal Resolver and Verifier, and others, right? So we've demonstrated this. We are walking the talk on this. So I will stop there, and I will simply note that I made the comment in phase 1. We look to see if the company can walk the talk. I want to assure you, Transmute has walked the talk and has demonstrated walking the talk both on the technology, as demonstrated by their interop demo and the testing that they underwent, as well as on the business side in their understanding of the domain as well. And on that note, I think I am done. Margot, I'm going to turn it over to you. And I'm not sure what the protocol is here, whether there is an opportunity for Q&A. Happy to answer any if there is. Otherwise, I will turn it over to you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Let me get everything set up here. All right. And I'm unmuted. Yes, thank you, Anil. That was incredible. And those words coming from you towards our company also mean a lot. So thank you again for sharing all of your insights and for your push to interoperability. That's been huge for this industry and this market. So this is actually the last slide. We just wanted to let you know what's coming next and then open up the floor for questions, comments, discussion that we can start in this call, but also can continue into other individual conversations with Transmute as well as other teams. So just wanted to let you know what we're doing here next is more testing and market discovery. So we're asking this question to different companies, like companies that you might work with, about how this verifiable certificate or credential process might work for your business. If you're a steel company, we can talk about, or you work with steel, we can talk about the certified mill test report. We would actually really love to talk to you if you're using that trade document. We need some insights there. But we can also speak more broadly about other trade or supplier verification or product attribute documents that you're currently working with and want to understand how they might be created using the kinds of technology that we've explored here today. And specifically, we want to understand how the processes that we've laid out here today compare or contrast to the tools and workflows we support today. If this is something that your suppliers or that your company would actually be able to use based on your existing technology and workflows. And then we know that you're already probably invested in digital transformation and other innovation efforts to drive your business metrics. And we want to learn more about what those are and how this kind of approach does or doesn't fit with those goals. So we'll be sharing, I'll drop it in the chat here in a moment, but also sharing in the follow-up email an easy link for you to schedule 30 minutes with our team in the next couple of weeks to have a longer conversation about some of those questions. But in the meantime, we want to open up the floor. You can feel free to raise your hand. I think you can, in the participants list, you can raise your little Zoom hand if you want to, or feel free to type a question into the chat box. And we'd love to hear your questions and reactions to what you've heard today.
And it looks like Mitch from Conexus just raised his hand.
Yeah, so I actually did the formal process of raising my hand, jumping in. Yeah, and so first of all, a great job to everybody who presented. It's just fascinating to see all of this and how it comes together. And I'll tell you, one of the things I've blown away by watching this and also prepping for this call, leading up to pulling these speakers, this technology together, is this interoperability piece that Anil really touched on greatly here in the last few minutes. And so I'm kind of curious, maybe pull it back to a Transmute example. Margot, with your example of, all the way through a steel mill in China that goes to different points along the way to some customer in the United States. I mean, would even though that it's an open standard, would all of those players in that supply chain need to be on one platform, or, and Anil's violently shaking his head no. So that's what I'm trying to figure out. And so, maybe to your point here on this last slide, when you start talking about, how this compares to other technologies, I'll tell you with manufacturing, especially, when there's a supply chain, the only thing I can really liken it to is ERP systems where suppliers and vendors and everybody, they need to send each other demand signals and all that. And what you find out is the large OEMs start to require, tier 1 suppliers and tier 2 and on down to use similar systems, right? Whether it's SAP or Oracle or whatever. And so I'm trying to wrap my mind around how, if I jump on a blockchain platform, how a supplier of mine or a customer of mine can use an entirely different blockchain platform, but yet it kind of works together. And so, I kind of hear the origin of where that came from Anil, but I'm kind of curious how Transmute sees that.
Carol, do you want to speak to that piece? I'm not sure if you're jumping in there.
Yeah, no, I'll talk about it from the business perspective, and Margot might add more color on the product or the technical perspective. But I think first it's important to anchor this part of the discussion in a specific belief that we have at Transmute, which is that this particular kind of technology, because it's working across disparate systems and lots of different vendors, like Anil mentioned, we believe that interoperability is actually what is going to create a market that's worth going out and capturing. And so I'll say that that's been Transmute's fundamental belief since the beginning. And then as the technical standards and what I like to think of as really pre-competitive technical foundations are developed, we're starting to learn at which of these layers in the technology stack is it most efficient and scalable to interoperate. So Anil touched a little bit on this, and I was on a call with another partner right before this. A lot of folks think that that's at the credential transfer layer. So how do I issue a credential that then you can accept in your system? And I'm gonna way oversimplify this example, but this is how I actually explain it to my parents, which is that I'm based in Texas, but I haven't always resided in Texas, although my driver's license has always been Texas issued. And so let's say I'm a resident of California. Today, my physical driver's license is acceptable in both states. But if I had a digital wallet that was issued by the state of California or was built by someone in the state of California that for some reason could not render my digital version of my Texas driver's license, it would be completely useless and I wouldn't be able to get any state DMV to adopt it. And so I think from Transmute's perspective, a lot of our kind of secret sauce or magic sauce, as Anil likes to call it, is really more around our understanding and kind of guided experience in helping businesses determine where this technology can add the most value. So what kinds of workflows and credentials are going to be most impactful to your business to digitize or use this technology for. But it's fundamental to our business that all of the pieces that must interoperate or the pre-competitive technical foundations be open so that we can rapidly get to that point of interoperability across these systems.
Yeah, I think that about covers it. Between that response, Carol, and everything Anil shared about the importance of interoperability, we're building it's a more open network concept, really, and it's a different way of thinking about things, but I think it's going to be really refreshing, especially to companies who have found themselves deeply locked into technical contracts and then suddenly siloed from the rest of the world. That's not a fun feeling, and it's expensive, and you may resent your technology provider. We believe that there's a future where that doesn't have to be the case, and you choose your technology provider because they provide you that added benefit, but you could leave them at any point in time, as is the case in any healthy relationship. You choose each other every day. Maybe that's a little too romantic, but blockchain is very romantic, I have to say. I also wanted to just quickly note that we had a private comment. I'll just pull out, I won't say the name, but just pull out the kind of question and ask if Anil and Vinny want to add some color here. Wanting to learn more about blockchain's role in companies' visibility and traceability to help avoid disruptions in supply chains. I'm curious if either of you has insights as you think about business applications here and disruptions to supply chains.
Would you like me to go first, Anil? All right.
Please do, sir. That's your world.
Absolutely. So right now, I can't talk too much about the project, but we're looking at a complete re-engineering of the way we're doing business with the private sector. But really what you ultimately want to come up with is something I believe I mentioned earlier, but the concept of being able to track the goods out of the manufacturing plant and into the consumer's hands. From the perspective of the private sector, just looking at fraudulent goods, if you are numbering your pieces coming out of the manufacturer and you have 10,000 widgets, and you're following that all the way into commerce, even if the manufacturer had a back room and was able to completely duplicate what it had made perfectly, you would still find that 10,001 would be a problem, 10,002 would be a problem. So it gives an absolute much better, what's the word I'm looking for? A much better control of your supply chain. And when you start to add that into your AI, your machine learning, you start to be able to think about just-in-time decisions that you haven't been able to make before. So I think across the board, that is really what we're looking to do. I have been describing the way that we're trying to do business over the way that we do it today as more of a neurological response. I don't think about my hand moving, right? It just simply happens because the flow is going through to my hand to make it move, okay? The systems should be working that way. Right now, what we do is, I hate to use this expression, but in the government, what I find that we've done is we've shoehorned So we say we need data, we ask for that data, and we ask you to put it in a certain way that doesn't complement the way the system is already built. It doesn't match your supply chain. So we're starting to look at moving more in that direction, so that you begin to have a standard way of doing business that is logical with the complete beginning to end vision of that supply chain. So I hope that's helpful for the question.
Emil, do you have any other thoughts to add there as you've been thinking about concepts like traceability and visibility? Any other final thoughts?
More from the perspective of, I think, on Vinny lives that world. I do not. What I'm interested in is making sure that each chain in that link that provides that visibility is not basically beholden to a large platform vendor who sort of come in and said, the only way that you can get visibility across these multiple links is, hey, you all need to onboard onto my platform. So all of the work that we've done, and this addresses the question that Mitch, that you are asking as well, is that we want to make sure that, yes, from a business perspective, deep visibility into the supply chain, that may allow for faster cargo release and things of that nature, because CBP has higher confidence in that data. But at the end of the road, we do not want to be in the position where whether it is a 5-man or a 5-woman shop or a huge company, you basically have the same level playing field in the choice of technologies that you can choose in order to integrate with that supply chain. Provided those set technologies support these standards and specifications, you should be able to bring your stack of choice into the mix. I will simply note that in one of the POCs that we were involved in with Vinny, the development of one, without naming that customs broker, I simply note it's 2 brothers. The entire development for that that was done by one person in Visual Basic of all things, right? So for those people who aren't sort of understand that, will get what they were able to accomplish with one person showing interoperability with the supply chain that had everybody from FedEx to UPS to Walmart on the same supply chain. And I'll just leave it at that.
Can I just add one thing to Anil, what Neil was saying? You got to understand too that it's to the benefit of the companies that are going to be purchasing this software to not have to customize over and over and over again. The cost reduction is immense. So if this continues to go the way that we're seeing it go, you're going to see a market adoption happen a lot more rapidly, because you can get these mid-range and then the smaller companies involved. And one thing that I don't think that we're saying explicitly, so I do want to say it explicitly, is this is across, yes, it's mainly used for blockchain, but you can use other technologies. You may not always get the full benefit of the blockchain, but the fact that you can incorporate other technologies into these standards is so important. So I think you're going to see, where I was thinking 5 to 7 years, I'm now starting to look at 2 to 3 years for implementation. We're seeing larger companies, the American Hondas of the world, the Toyotas of the world, the pharmaceutical companies. We're starting to see a growth around the world looking at this technology in the private sector, and I think it's just going to keep going. So just wanted to add that.
Great. Thank you both for your perspectives and your continued support. And we're on this journey with you. We're excited to see where it goes next. And we're at time. I've had a couple folks message separately, and I'll continue to stay on the line for a few minutes if you have any questions you want to share privately. I've also reshared the link to schedule time with the Transmute team, which I think a few of you have already done. Thank you for doing that. We're excited to talk with you more and dig into the details of the things that you're working on. And we will follow up with that link as well as information about how to access this recording. So that's a wrap. And thank you so much, Mitch and Conexus, for putting on this event and bringing Transmute into your community and allowing us to present to your member base and the many organizations that trust your organization. So thank you again for having us, and thank you again to Vinny and Anil for being here and sharing your important perspectives. And everyone, we hope you have an excellent day. Thank you.